Nowhere in nature, unless you're a fainting goat, does a human or an animal go into the fight or flight response and then lie on their back in a rested position. You just don't see that.
If every 2 or 3 days you're getting in a plunge, you can have a significant improvement and increase to your metabolism, generally speaking, across the board the entire week.
A lot of times we try to solve hardship in life by creating more comfort and pushing away discomfort. But you're living on your edge and you're growing and you're evolving when you're facing discomfort and you're willfully putting yourself in uncomfortable situations.
Talk to us a little bit about why and what the differences are between doing those kinds of practices and actually putting your whole body into a barrel full of cold water.
We've integrated so much comfort into our life. So if you can just tone down some of the modern conveniences and comforts, if it's uncomfortable to walk outside barefoot, just go walk outside barefoot.
This is Willpower.
Sometimes the way out of overwhelm isn't more information. It's more cold water. Now, y'all know that I've been doing cold exposure, cold plunging, wild swimming, all things cold exposure and cold therapy for over 9 years. I put well over 6,000 people one-on-one into cold plunges, ice barrels, cold water, cutting ice holes, getting crazy, and really falling in love with this practice. And so it was important for me, as I've looked through hundreds of different styles of tubs and vessels and ways that we can do cold exposure, to find one that I really, really loved. And in the fall of last year, I sort of settled in on a unit that was well crafted and really liked the feeling. It was an extraordinary experience every time that I plunged in one. And I've been through various different units that they've had over the years. And I really just have fallen deeply in love with Ice Barrel. And I went to the company and I said, hey, how can I get somebody on the show who can talk more explicitly about how and why you designed it in this way, how the chiller differentiates so well from the marketplace that exists right now, which is so many chillers coming from like China and all over the place, and wattage and horsepower, and like how we really discern what's going to work for us depending on where we live in the world, and what's going to be consistent and what's not going to have breakdown, and what has good customer support and what has insulation, and what's the difference, and why am I loving this Ice Barrel so much? Because of course, with my level of expertise, there's so many little pieces of the puzzle that I really wanted to give feedback and share with the company, but I also wanted to understand their why. And so on today's episode of Willpower, I go deep into the ice-cold edge of transformation with my guest, Wyatt Ewing. Now, Wyatt went from flatlining under burnout in corporate aviation to designing one of the most elegant cold therapy tools I've ever seen. And the story isn't just about barrels of ice, right? The Ice Barrel unit, it's beautiful, it's insulated, it has an app that you can time the cold and temperature and all of that. But this episode is really about how we can utilize these tools to rewire the nervous system, how we can use both our bodies and the cold to reclaim presence, and how we can all craft a life built not on comfort, but on conscious resistance, this like mitigating small doses of stress to be able to create arousal flexibility in the body and an understanding of how we can overcome obstacles. So I'm so excited to welcome Wyatt Ewing of Ice Barrel, have this conversation, and you will be able to tell between the two of us, we are just passion players about all kinds of cold exposure. So let's literally dive in. Thanks so much for being on the Willpower podcast, Wyatt. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for having me. I'm stoked to be here as well.
Great. I want to let the audience know a little bit about sort of your journey as you leaned into cold water. And I'd really love to hear about like the edge of cold water for you. So the memory you have of the first time of getting into cold, how it affected you, and yeah, what happened to your body, your brain, and your being that inspired you to be where you are today.
I love this question. And I'm going to tell a story that I've only talked to my wife about, which is a really cool story of how the cold has always been calling me, to the point where I created Ice Barrel, which was the very first direct-to-consumer cold therapy product. So first, when I was a young boy, I was probably like 10 or 11 years old. I was in Boy Scouts, and there was a polar plunge. And this is middle of the winter at Boy Scout camp. And I was the only person to show up to the polar plunge. And I was terrified. And that was the first time I deliberately jumped into a cold body of water. And I was the only one there out of like 500 Boy Scouts who got the polar plunge badge. And I still
Wow.
have it to this
Wow.
day, which was really cool. So that was the very first time. And I felt just a crazy sense of like empowerment from that moment in my life. And I always carried that with me. The second time, I was a very active kid. I was in every single activity you could think of, but I was also in martial arts. I was uniquely good at Taekwondo and I got my black belt and I went through all that. And then after I left high school, finished that time in my life, the grand master of that martial arts studio called me out of the blue, and I was surprised he even had my phone number. And he asked if I could meet with him. I met with him and he offered me a job to work at that place. But then he also ended the conversation with something I think it's important to know, that the key to longevity is go hot water, cold water, hot water, cold water, hot water, cold water. And this guy's like in his like late 90s at this point.
Wow.
And it just stuck with me that, and I was like, huh, it was just a strange moment where like the cold came back to me. And then before I started the company, the big catalyst was I was very anxious while I was selling corporate jets. I was struggled with depression. I was like 140 pounds. Right now I weigh about 180 pounds, very active. But back then I was like very stressed out. You could see it on my face and body. And I walked into this gym and this guy told me I looked like shit. And I was very offended. And then he encouraged me to try cold showers. So like, again, it came up in my life. So I went home and I took that first cold shower deliberately. I felt like I was where my feet were, like that Jack Johnson song, right? I was where my feet were. I was so present in the moment. And I liken it to that feeling, you know, when you have like a head cold for like 5 to 7 days and then you get better and you're like, I forgot what it feels like to feel good again. That's what it felt like, in this strange sense of presence came over me. So I just started taking cold showers like crazy. Then the company, the idea, everything came to me. I started like prototyping and I built my very first prototype. And I will never forget the day that I set it up. It was 10 p.m. in the evening. It was 30 some degrees outside. I added ice and cold water and I plunged the first time in that ice barrel.
So cool. I have interesting stories about cold water, like being woven through my life, where you think, oh, if I had known at 11 what I knew now, I might have I would have connected the dots. We can only kind of do that backwards, but that's so beautiful that you had those instances. Was that master at the martial arts studio, was he having you do cold and heat, or he was just sharing with you?
He was just sharing it with me as like a token for longevity for my life.
It's so wild.
It was very random.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
not, as the universe pushing you towards what you're going to end up, where you're going to end up in your purpose. So yeah, I think the thing that's really fascinating from a listener standpoint as well, so I've spoken a lot about cold, and I'm sure that I'll have a lot of the instructors out of the Sherpa Breath and Cold framework listen to this. And I think that there's a conversation to be had about cold water exposure, deliberate cold exposure, all the beautiful things that we bring to the human body when we do this to ourselves. But I also want to just lean in initially on the conversation around understanding the landscape of all the different styles of cold baths, plunging techniques, cold showers, barrels that are out there. And just as a reminder to like, what gave you the impetus to design a barrel versus a tub versus some other shape or style of unit?
This was like in the early days of cold therapy, before companies were like popping up left and right. Really our competitive advantage in moat. And I was surprised, Kristin, that nobody else caught on to this early on like we did. But I took this group of, I don't know, like 20 people to this river in Colorado. And I asked everybody to go get in the cold water and stay in the cold water. And all I did was observe. That was the whole point of this exercise, was just observe. And one thing I immediately noticed, even in the shallow parts of the water, everybody crouched and tried to keep their back and their spine upright. Nobody tried to lie down. And one thing that I uniquely liked living in Colorado at the time was if I wanted to jump in a cold body of water, or river or lake, especially if there was ice, I would always like lower myself down into it. And I loved that feeling. It felt very primal and it felt very like natural. It's what my body wanted to do. And so if you think about it, nowhere in nature, unless you're a fainting goat, does a human or an animal go into the fight or flight response and then lie on their back in a rested position? You just don't see that. So why would we hurl our bodies into the fight or flight response in cold water and lie down in a bathtub? It's so counterintuitive to nature. So when I was designing Ice Barrel, I wanted to honor and respect the body's natural response in the cold water. And that was always to keep everything upright. So that was why I designed the barrel, was how do I keep the body in the most comfortable position while it's in an uncomfortable environment? And that led to tremendous success. And then every single product we iterated after that, we always honored that number one component.
Yeah, I love that. I didn't know that about Ice Barrel. And then also it makes a lot of sense. And then as someone who's put in, I don't know, hundreds, maybe not 1,000 at this point, but at least hundreds of people into cold water, wild cold water experiences, it's like very, very true as you're speaking to it, that 99% of the people are getting in and then lowering themselves into the water. And I also like it as a coaching experience for two reasons. Number one, especially with newer people, I think there's something about the containment of the barrel that feels like it's creating more safety for you than laying out in the open, right? Which is probably why animals don't lay out belly up, which is the most vulnerable position. And also because it feels, so it's like a safety thing, like keeping people kind of a bit cozy in there, although that sounds hard to believe. I think that's very true. And then also just like there's a notion that I can get them to do, like I'm always like 3, 2, 1, go, or up to your, I always say without hesitation or expectation, step in, all the way up to your neck. Because I'm wanting to, especially with newbies, affect the mammalian dive reflex or have that affect the body and get people to really have that, what I like to call the turnover and my friend Lisa calls the bliss point, or just this moment where we actually have the body say, oh, I'm okay, by using our breath or just by reaching that point. I'm just curious to see what you have felt and experienced too, just about that moment. You know, I call it the turnover, but like there's a notion that I have that I think we really see in practice, because in the world of cold plunging, I've put 5,000 plus people one-on-one in various different styles of, you know, tubs and barrels and you name it. You know, it's like I've used people's bathtubs at home who don't have the access, you know?
Sure.
And I think that that's like one marker, right, to just say to listeners is, hey, if you're not sure about if this is a practice for you and you don't want to go to a place that's either a clinical setting or like a fun recovery studio to try this out, then it's like you have to start somewhere, and you're probably going to start either with like some sort of cheapo Amazon-y thing that's barrel shaped but isn't going to last more than 1 or 2 plunges. And then you're probably going to start in your own home bathtub because that's all you got, right? And so quite often I'll have clients do that a bit if they're nervous about, not everybody loves to like go to a public place and do this stuff. So they'll try it at home to see if they're into it, or if I've coached people through on Zoom calls and FaceTime in the most strange places you could ever imagine. But just like the notion of this turnover, like what I see in practice a lot is this like minute or so in, very case dependent on the user, the person, but a minute or so in, people going from a fight or flight up-regulated state not to a down-regulated state, which quite often is like confusing to some of the coaches I train, but it's like going to a more of a flow up-regulated state where they feel safe and they feel comfortable enough to stay in for the delineated period of time, et cetera. And that you can actually see a shift, I think, in the person's body and their eyes and what's happening in the tissue. And I just wonder, like, if you could speak to a little of that with the amount of time you've been doing this. You have to have seen and or coached people, tons of people through this process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I've seen it all at this point. It's like they go from a visceral response of out of control to, even though they're in a stress state, they're doing it consciously. And so I think that's like the key of when it switches from an unconscious reaction to a conscious response. And it's always such a unique moment. And that's the goal. One of the ways I like to get there for myself, and also when I'm coaching somebody through, is we establish, and there's a lot of different great techniques to do this, but one that I like is we establish a breathing pattern that we're going to come back to once we're in the water in that challenging moment. And so we do it outside of the barrel. And then as we're lowering ourselves in, we're maintaining that. And then even though there's hyperventilating and whatever it may be, we know what we're coming back to. So it's like an anchor point, and the breath is great for that. So yeah, I love that. It's funny. The other thing, when I first started doing this back in 2017, and I would take the prototype with me to try and give away free ice baths, people thought I was like this crazy guy. Like nobody was doing it.
It was fun back then, though, right? It was like so renegade.
It
People were
was
writing me
so,
on social media. Like I was like, I did a 30-day ice bath challenge before anyone was doing it. Mostly, I mean, I'm sure other
yeah,
people had done it, but and people were writing me. I was on my California rooftop in a silver trough. I just like bought a trough
yeah.
at a feed store, and people were like, "Are you okay? This isn't safe." Like
Oh
people just
yeah.
thought, "What is going on?" But I had gone through like XPT's training with Laird and Gabby, and so I was like, "Okay, I know what I'm doing. I have enough science that I'm not crazy." But
Yeah.
people just were like checking checking in to make sure I hadn't
No,
lost my
for
mind.
sure. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was so fringe back
Yeah,
then.
I know, I know. I kind
But
of miss that.
I do too. I miss it as well. It was fun. Even the early days, like right when it started popping off and it was just all over social media. The thing that was cool about it is it was so infectious. Like it created so much joy in people that I think even post COVID, a lot of people needed a lot more joy in their life. But one thing I would do to get people into cold therapy, like at these events, I would just be like, hey, I'll give anybody $1,000 if they take an ice bath and get out and they're not smiling or smirking. And I never once had to pay it out. Like people would try and get out all stoic and then they would break a smile. It's just cool to see how it changes your state of being.
This is a typical example I imagine you hear as well when someone's like, oh, at university level, I really did this. I was on the swim team or I did whatever. I was wrestling and I like gotten cold and I hated it. Or someone who's like brand new who's listening to this, who's like, I see all these crazy people on social. Cold isn't for me. As long as they don't have like some crazy contraindication or medical condition, what's the motivational speech you give people to let them potentially put a toe in the water, so to speak? Try this practice.
I have a couple actually. It depends on the group of people that I'm probably talking to. I kind of have like if you're an A-type personality, I have my version that is going to work for you. But if you're not an A-type person, like I think what's interesting at the end of the day, there's not a lot of modalities out there that within 2 minutes, you can improve your mood and your energy levels. You can boost your metabolism. You can reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. You can reduce inflammation and pain in the body. Just 2 minutes. Like what other modality out there can cause that effect in the shortest amount of time? Like there's not a lot. And so it's just a great way to supercharge and change your inner state. But if you're an A-type person, like pick your hard. You know what I mean? Like taking an ice bath is hard. Not taking an ice bath is actually hard, right? You got to live with the anxiety of the day or the stress of the day. Like beat the day. Like if that's the first thing you do in the morning, that's the hardest thing you do through your day. The rest of the day is you've won it all.
Yeah, and I really I vibe with that so much. I think the A-type personality thing is also interesting because quite often I use the example of like the CrossFit guy, and I'm sure that's a huge generalization, but someone who's just getting in, who's like, I'm going to muscle my way through this, is like an interesting notion. So it's like if somebody's like listening right now and they're that person, there's a piece of this I think that leads to how do we surrender in the uncomfortable? And I know you talk about this a lot, and I'd love for you to expound a bit upon it. It's like this is going to be like a summary quote, or that you talk about how we're all just like sort of sitting in too much comfort in the day-to-day experience and in life, and that part of this getting into uncomfortable situations is something that can help our growth potential. And I just would love for you to speak to that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, like life is hard and we all grow up trying to find our way and trying to understand it all and trying to play in this like sandbox with everybody else. And we have our past experiences that inform our beliefs and our actions, and it's freaking hard. And a lot of times we try to solve hardship in life by creating more comfort and pushing away discomfort. But you're living on your edge and you're growing and you're evolving when you're facing discomfort and you're willfully putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. That's like kind of the key. Like the treasure you seek most is in the cave you least want to go into. So find that big scary cave and charge ahead. Now, it takes courage to do that. And that I think is where a lot of us need to spend time, is developing courage. And I think that's best done through when something feels challenging that's in front of you in the moment, is take a step towards it. You don't have to go all the way. You just have to take a step towards it. And maybe that's having an honest conversation. Maybe that's being honest with yourself for once and sticking up for yourself, right? I think this used to be a whole heck of a lot easier though. And what I mean by that is like hot water on demand is like less than 100 years old. Like we've integrated so much comfort into our life where less than 100 years ago, than just being alive, we had a lot of external stressors on us that were more like use stress, the good type of stress, where we've like eradicated all of that. So if you can just tone down some of the modern conveniences and comforts, I think that's like a great way to start. You know, if it's uncomfortable to walk outside barefoot, just go walk outside barefoot. You know what I mean? Like just do little things. They make the biggest differences.
There's a group of women here in Austin, which Austin is a bad example in some ways, but this is like as winters we're starting to get, down here, and they're like, okay, I'm going to be in my booty shorts and my sports bra and go and flip flops and walk to kind of start that shift of getting into cold and whatnot. And I think there's plenty of people living in snow regions that can do this easily as a little bit of a starter. And I also want to talk about why that's different, right? The cold shower experience, great. I'm down for the entree of, this is like the gateway to fully immersing yourself. So walking in cold, getting in snow angels, I've seen it all, cold showers. But talk to us a little bit about why and what the differences are between doing those kinds of practices and actually putting your whole body into a barrel full of cold water.
Yeah, I mean, one of the coolest benefits is you get the hydrostatic pressure of the water on the body. It's like a giant ice pack surrounding the body. When you go to like cryotherapy, it's a very topical experience that's great for the skin, hair, and nails, but you're not getting the inner therapeutic benefits like a traditional ice bath. Additionally, you're able to submerge yourself down to the base of the neck. You're going to start stimulating and activating the vagus nerve, which is much harder to do in a cold shower and with cryo. I mean, taking that traditional ice bath. The other thing is it's not actually, in my opinion, and a lot of opinions I've heard, like a freezing cold shower is harder than an ice bath.
Listen, I agree. I don't want to be pelted with like icy cold water, like depending on where you live. It's a lot to take.
Yeah.
I'd rather like put myself in and have the full experience of that, like, the wash that comes over you. That's like, oh, I'm doing the hard thing. And then like having the physiology point meet that notion in your mind that you're actually doing it and feeling like some level of a greater level of success, I feel like, or a greater level of like patting myself on the back and excitement. And I'm sure it's all the catecholamines popping off, but it's like I feel so different when I come out of something that feels like a full immersion experience. Especially if it's like wild water. We can't do it all the time, right? It's not feasible to do that every day unless you live in a place. Like we were talking about Colorado before we started recording, but you can be in those places and maybe do that. But most people don't have access to a cold river every day, or it's like a little extra to go figure out how to do that. So this mimicking that experience can be so profound. And to that end, I want to talk a little bit about like the consumer experience. From time to time, I talk about products, quote unquote, on the podcast. And I think the thing I can like honestly and truthfully say, and to be candid and transparent, you and I are starting to partner on more things. And this is such a beautiful opportunity to share the love that I have for Ice Barrel in general. But just speaking from a consumer product standpoint, people write me all the time. I see reviews of all these different types of brands on YouTube. The biggest sort of challenges and complaints coming up are people not knowing how to navigate the budget that they have to get a unit that's going to be good for them. Also saying there's a lot of bells and whistles. There's like lights that change. There's, 14 things going on. There's ozone. There's people adding things, additives to the water. There's different systems. There's chillers. There's ice cubes, all of that. And just kind of getting confused in the landscape of all of the brands that are out there. The other thing that I hear a lot about and people will call me about is maintenance challenges. They'll buy something that they found on Alibaba. It takes 6 weeks to arrive. It's maybe built well or not, depending on what that means to you. And it doesn't work after 2 weeks, or something goes wrong with breakage, or it shows up with an issue. And then they're like, I don't know how to get it repaired or fixed. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the landscape of like, how do I pick the ice bath or the barrel or the unit that's the most, effective and efficient for my budget and my lifestyle?
This is awesome. So keep in mind, like cold water on demand is very complex. Like It's simple, but it's not easy. And if you think about it, like when you turn your shower all the way cold, that's actually not cold. That's just the temperature of the water coming out, right? Like whatever, if you're on a well, it's going to be the temperature of the well. If you're in the city, like in Austin, like it's not cold at all. You know what I mean? So that's actually not cold water. The process of cooling water and pulling the heat out of it through the heat exchanger and the compressor and the condenser, right? All those parts have to come together to actually get you cold water on demand. And it's very new technology of trying to chill water down into the 40s and 30s. Previously, what you've seen in the market, and it's actually, I have this long, like hour rant about the evolution of refrigeration in the cold therapy space because it's interesting to me, but
Your chiller something.
yeah, it's interesting because back in the early days, like I tested so many different chillers on the market, but they were all either aquarium chillers, home brewing chillers. Nothing was actually made for cold therapy. And the problem was a lot of the components, specifically the compressor, you're not trying to like freeze your fish out. You're trying to keep the fish tank at 55 to 60 degrees, which again, like you're getting benefits of cold therapy at that temperature, but the consumers have wanted to go down into the 40s and 30s. So it's like driving your car when the RPMs hit the red, right? That little red dash. Just because your car can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And so these fish aquarium chillers were getting like driven in the red and then they started burning out. Well, when the EPA announced that they're going to ban R410A refrigerant, China was like, let's flood the US with as much of the R410 refrigerant as possible, make it super accessible. Well, everyone thought that they could turn those units into cold therapy units. Clearly not the case. There have been so many cold therapy companies that have gone out of business. There have been crazy warranty, class action lawsuits, and it's because you were using fish aquarium chillers or literally window AC units that you were converting into chillers. And
there was a lot going on too with like the whole like quarter of a horsepower, 1 horsepower, people not understanding like what the power source is or the wattage is. I'm going to use all the wrong terms for electric, but it's like what that right horsepower is to actually create the cold conditions and like other things and components of the unit that are just like things I don't even want to have to deal with as a consumer and end user.
Oh, it got way out of hand. The whole horsepower thing is a complete joke because a lot of times the only thing that's actually getting measured inside of a chiller and horsepower is the pump. So that has nothing to do with cooling. You have to look at like the BTUs. And so there's like all this intricacy here and it got so honestly, it got really, really out of hand. That's why it took us so long to come out with a chiller because I refused to use an aquarium chiller and try and retrofit it and label it as a cold therapy chiller. That's what got all these companies into so much trouble. We took our time to build our chiller from scratch properly. It took me from 2019 to 2024, and it cost like $2.5 million. It was brutal, but we were able to do it. And now we have a product that we're able to stand behind, where not a lot of people can say that. Now, I'm going to quit ranting on this because I can keep going on, but I think what's important, if you're new to cold therapy, start with that cold shower, try the family bathtub, get comfortable with the practice. And then when you want to create a space where you can have this practice, you can layer in consistency into it. Just starting off with an ice barrel is a great way to start. And add some ice to it. Even start with just the temperature of the hose water and just ease into it. Like the point is not to be extreme. The point is can I build consistency in this practice? And so I think we've developed an incredible way through the initial product, layering in the app, and then when you're ready, adding in the chiller, you can create a sustainable, consistent cold therapy ritual in your life.
The reality is I know that the answer to long-term sustainable like longevity benefits, health benefits, it doesn't mean that one cold plunge isn't going to be great for you or one wild river swim or one dip in a barrel. But when you are only doing one, you're getting a fractional benefit. When you have a consistent practice, your body, especially when you talk about metabolism, right? It's like every 36 hours, you're getting a boost for up to 36 hours, right? According to the research. Could be a little less depending on the body you're in. But if that's true, and every 2 or 3 days you're getting in a plunge, you can have a significant improvement and increase to your metabolism, generally speaking, across the board the entire week. Right? This is not to knock people who are on GLP-1s or navigating all these other things with blood sugar, but it's like there are studies that are showing that this can be so helpful to those things. So why would we not make an attempt to figure out how to get this in our lives? in a way that's like, at least simple, right? The challenge that always shows up is if it's not in your home, 2 minutes is easy if it's at your if it's at your place. If it's, I got to drive 40 minutes or I have to go to the gym or I have to whatever, maybe you're working out there already. Maybe then you have the whole other conversation, which is like, am I lifting weights for hypertrophic, powerlifting effects, and do I get in the cold and all that stuff? And it just, to me, is like, if you're developing any slight affinity or understanding about the actual benefits of this thing, it's like getting it in your home just eliminates all of the hurdles to getting in for 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever anyone's protocol is from that standpoint. And yeah, your suggestion is great. I love this. It's like hose water or like ice cubes. In LA, I used to have the restaurant supply guys deliver ice twice a week, and I had a chest freezer filled with ice that at some point later on became a conversion, which was like another touch and go thing, because I was like, I'm plugged in a chest freezer filled with water that I've sealed. Like, there was just a lot of sketchiness.
That's scary.
In the beginning. Most of the time I'd like unplug it. At some point I put it on like a timer. It's all the things that we did because we didn't know what else to do back then. Yeah, and as I put a trough up there from the feed supply store, it was like, okay, this can now hold my ice, and then I can actually do frequent ice baths because then I have a back stock of ice that I couldn't fit in my freezer. So it's like, not to deter anyone from the process, but it's like, over time, if I look at what I spent on ice, on dysfunctional things, on like learning and that learning curve, it's like, it's a good investment to make in your health and longevity. And then also knowing that you, especially with like the new acquisition through Sunlight and you guys being in that structural of the overarching umbrella company, what an opportunity to know that there's like someone to call a customer service, someone who can help you with challenges that arise, right? Something that happens, I don't know, with the barrel or the chiller, there's like a place to go. And I think that's like a barrier to entry for so many people.
Yeah, I'm really thankful. Like, Ice Barrel recently came under the umbrella of Sunlight and Sauna, which they are like the grandparents of infrared and even red light therapy, which is incredible. And so they acquired key assets from Ice Barrel, and I'm excited because it's like Ice Barrel has like a long-term home, and it will continue being just the household cold therapy brand, and they're going to do it right, which is cool. And that was always what was most important to me. It was always about like, how can we properly take care of the customer long-term?
Tell me about some components or things that you've seen that are added bells and whistles to cold exposure that you feel like this is a 1% win and it's like just not worth having.
So obviously, if you have the space, get an outdoor shower as well. Like, those are amazing. Rinse off before you get in. Pick up some water stabilizer from icebarrel.com, add it to the water. It's funny, you'll appreciate this. People were really surprised that a lot of our customers have 2 ice barrels, one for them and one for their friends. So that's pretty common, right? Post-COVID, we want to suffer together and ice plunge together, but we want to pee in our separate barrels. So
funny.
Also, there's a difference between filtration and sanitation. And I think a lot of times that gets conflated, but you can filter dirty water all day long, and maybe you get the large particles out, but the actual water purity is very poor. So it's important to use a water additive that will sanitize the water. And I actually think water sanitization is much more important than water filtration, though it is important. And with the chiller, you get the filtration, but you got to add in water additives. Now, I'm kind of a granola crunchy kind of guy. I don't like toxic things so I'm big in like copper, silver ions, hydrogen peroxide, salt, like other cleaning methods, but you can use chlorine, bromine, things like that.
When I was with the trough, I would put like a quarter of a cup or so, no more than that, of food grade hydrogen peroxide in the beginning, because I was like, I don't know what else to do. And like some of the things in the market would get foamy. And I was like, I don't know if I want to be sitting in this, even though I'm not sitting in it that long. Like, I just want to know if I'm sitting in this thing that would get, like foamy at the top of it. Also not great for Instagram photos, which everybody always wants.
Sure.
So there's a few different models, and I would love for you to just like lay out the differences between the models so people can have kind of an understanding, because I know that as this space has evolved, you guys have answered some of the consumer calls and also developed a little bit different ways, slightly different models to get cold in.
Yeah, so we'll start with the Ice Barrel 500. That's like the premium version. It's a really cool product where there's 2 steps to get in, a step on the inside that doubles up as a seat, You're sitting upright, fully submersing the body. It's an extremely insulated product, so it maintains temperature very well. That's made right here in the US from recycled materials, which is really cool. And it has the quick connect ports for the chiller. It's just a great product. It's the biggest one that we have, but it's also still very lightweight, portable, very durable, very neat product. Then we have the Ice Barrel 300. That product is actually my favorite. You just step right into it. You sit down kind of in the lotus position or with your knees up. It's a cool product. It was a lot of fun making that one. And then there's the Ice Barrel 400. That's the OG one, which I found out today, actually. Sad day, but it's going to be temporarily discontinued while they work through new manufacturing capabilities.
And then you can be like the OG with the one because it feels and looks like a barrel.
Yeah, so if you have it, hold on to it. And this right here was the very first patent I got on that product, which was really cool. So kind of a surreal day hearing it's getting discontinued.
Yeah, the units are all, they have a similar barrel shape. And I think it's all, a lot of this is some about budget and price point, some about what your family's usage. And I definitely, like a woman last week, I had a fly-through video tour with her to kind of look at her backyard and measure some areas of it because we all have different spaces that we're gonna plunge in. I've even seen the barrel indoors in someone's home. It's like people are just like making it work. Get your apartment on, no balcony. Just
Exactly.
make it work. Talk to me a little bit and just like share what you're seeing. I'm seeing some really interesting, just from like a commercial perspective, or just I'm seeing some really interesting regulation. Are you keeping your thumb on the print of that?
I used to. Since the acquisition, I have not been super up to date on that. I'm curious what you're seeing, though. I'll comment on it.
Yeah, I mean, like there's just over the last year or two, there's things, I have a large percentage of my coaches that are in Ontario specifically, but Canada. And they've been doing some real interesting stuff up there, like requiring any locations. Most of this is like commercial or public or community gathering spaces, even if it's like a pay what you want type thing or donation only, where they're like, if you're doing cold water plunging, they don't have regulation enough. The only regulation they have is around swimming pools. So they have to have a life ring hung. They have to have a lifeguard on duty. There's more regulation I see coming around, sanitization for commercial units if they're using bromine or chlorine or things like that, which is, standard for a public facility, I think, because we don't necessarily know what to do. I have to believe there are safer ways to do it than that. Not that that's unsafe. It's just like, again, sitting in something that is chemicalized doesn't feel like my dream. I mean, I do it. I go to places and, I'm traveling all over the world and just going to places that have custom cold plunges of all kinds and, like tubs, or they're building something out of wood and there's bromine in there. It's a pretty cowboy landscape because no one ever had to regulate this before. And I think even more than the, hot tubs, you can understand some of that because it's heat and you're talking about heat and bacteria. And that's just like a recipe for growing things that are, not going to be good for you. But outside of the hot tub arena or like heated water, cold plunging just doesn't have precedent. Like there's not, more and more a little bit, people are talking about it, but I think cities have, regulation and the states have some regulation and people are coming in and there's a lot of this also building code, and the building code guy shows up and he's like, I don't know what to do. So here's 14 things you have to do because he doesn't really know.
Yeah, it's complex out there. I mean, back in the day, I would get calls to consult on projects, often trying to follow all the ADA compliance, the city code, plus the health department. So yeah, especially in New York and California, certain cities get very complex. I think it'll hopefully get standardized here fairly soon, just like the hot tub space. But it is important for sure that you get it together, because I've seen these studios get started, grand opening, put all the cost into it, and then some unfortunate, miserable person from the health department shows up and shuts it down.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. So make sure you get your ducks in a row.
Yeah, absolutely. For anyone who's like, bringing it into a greater scale in that way. And if someone is like listening to this and they're like, okay, I want to get more committed to cold exposure. I want to understand, what should I be thinking about first? I mean, I'll tell you what I advise people. I wonder if it's similar for you. It's like, if you have a budget and you're like going to go out and try to spend on something from like Alibaba or Amazon, and it's like a few $100s, I'm always talking to people to say, look, if you're not going to just get a trough, which then you have to get ice for, and again, is this lay down experience and a bit, different than being in a barrel, then I really think it's like, just do a payment plan and get a barrel by itself. like you're going from cold shower, you're going from wherever, but get a barrel by itself. And then there's nothing like a client, a customer, a coach to me that comes back and they're like, I just finally got the chiller. And they're like, I can't believe I waited this long.
Waited so long. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, just get started. Maybe cut your matcha budget in half and you'll be able to own an ice barrel by the end of the year.
That's a real thing, a matcha drinker. But yeah, let's just talk a little bit about like the mission, right? Where we go from here, what you see coming in the future of cold exposure, and how this, like, even just the acquisition of sunlight and like how it gets a chance to bolster the mission overall that you set in stone with your purpose on this project.
From the beginning, it was get colder, feel better. I envision a future where the power of cold therapy enhances everybody's potential. I think that we're in very unique times and there's a lot of instability, questions, fears, and life's not getting any easier. We have so much access, so much information, but yet it's not getting easier. And so I think people need healthy, consistent practices that can help make life a little bit more enjoyable, that can take the edge off a little bit, and I think cold therapy really does that. So despite maybe popular belief, I actually don't think we've hit mass adoption of cold therapy. I think we've transitioned from the early adopters to the early majority, but we're still in the early majority. It's going to get a lot more popular in the coming years. I think, unfortunately, there were some setbacks due to companies sourcing bad products in the space and burning out consumers, unfortunately. So I think that was a pretty big setback. And I think this industry as a whole is recovering from that. But we're definitely making good progress. It's a growing space for sure.
When you think about, let's say, your favorite protocol, maybe you're imagining someone who's already got a relative practice of cold exposure or like has gone through like the beginner stages of it. Do you have a favorite cold plunge / contrast protocol that you're like, this is the one, this is my favorite way to play?
Yeah, it depends on like, I think what I'm going through at the time. Right now, evening cold plunges are my thing. I used to do like the 5 a.m. club and then the right after a workout. And right now it's a great way, like get the kids in bed, sit in the sauna, take an ice bath. And I think everyone is at a different season of life and you're going through different things. There's been times where maybe I was pushing it too hard and the sauna and the ice bath was actually stressing out my system a little bit more. But right now I'm in a place of like, I'm enjoying the relaxation piece of it where I can sit in a sauna and I'm not pushing myself. I'm not trying to get like 25 minutes, maybe 18 minutes is okay. And then I sit in an ice bath for what feels good versus like setting a timer. So I think I'm in a space now where it's like, 15 to 18 minutes in the sauna, 3 to 4 minutes in the ice bath. I might do that once, twice, something like that. And then, then I sleep good.
I always like to wrap with asking a couple questions that are within the landscape of health optimization, but not necessarily around specifically cold, since we've been talking about that. And I'd love to kind of get a thing that you're doing right now, something that lights you up that is in the health optimization space outside of cold that might be like woven into your daily or weekly practice that you're just like, I'm on fire for this thing. It's really been helpful and that you're loving right now.
Yeah, that would actually be mountain biking. And the reason I say that specifically is mountain biking puts me in a flow state where I have to be so focused on that very moment because as soon as you stop focusing, you crash. So I love how mountain biking just forces me into a flow.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds like super presence. I have a mountain bike and I like it a lot, but I'm so novice. But I hear you have like wiped out a number of times. If you're not on it, you're under it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then if you could go back and have a conversation with like 13-year-old Wyatt, knowing everything that you know now, all the things that you've built, all the ways you've navigated mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, all of that, and your health, and you could give him one piece of advice to step more fully into his wellness or into, the greatest version of yourself, what would that piece of advice be?
Physically and figuratively, like open up your heart and your chest and charge ahead.
I love that. Anything else that we missed that you want to share or talk about? I like to always ask that.
I feel like we covered a lot today. It was a fun conversation. And Yeah, I hope that everybody gives cold a try while they're on their journey of living a more meaningful life.
Yeah, absolutely. And you already know I'm a super fan and will continue just like waving the freak flag of cold and all over the world. And especially just like, getting reconnected with you. And like, since you've moved away from Austin, okay, it's fine. I guess you're allowed to be over there in Kansas City, but reconnecting with you and just, watching the growth over time of this beautiful brand that you've just taken such good care of, and the way that you care about every sort of facet and feature that goes into Ice Barrel is just, it's a win for all of us. So thanks for all the good work you've done. I don't know if people tell you that enough. Pulling your hair out, creating new vessels for everyone to get into.
Yeah, well, it's much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, well, we will show link all the greatest information and the code and everything for you to, as a listener, to lean into deliberate cold exposure here with Ice Barrel. And thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for joining us here on Well Power. You can submit questions, learn more, shop incredible brands, and connect with me at wellpower.life, or follow me on social at biohacking.breath.cold. From comfort to courage, friends, we're doing it. Any foul language you hear is not approved by my mother.